Hello and welcome to the Church Tech Props podcast. My name is Jason Chisholm and I'm here with Rick Fair, and we're here to help small to medium-sized churches with essential tech problems that they might encounter.
Yeah, we've got about 20 or so years of experience doing this from small to medium-sized churches and have a lot of information to share and a lot of funny stories to go along the way with the kind of crazy things we've done putting all this stuff together over the years. What we want to do on this first episode is talk about some basics. And basics, what do you need for a sound system? I think sound systems are one of the most overlooked aspects of church music production, where in your case, you've been a music minister for almost 20 years now. And it's pretty common to walk into a church on a new job and have an existing sound system, right?
That's for sure, especially in smaller churches that I've been in.
Yeah, I think back, and we can segue into this. One of the first things we ever did together was a real small church that I can't even remember what they had before we put in the sound system. They barely had anything.
Yeah, it was just some small speakers and it was not very good.
Yeah, and we're dating ourselves here too, but this was probably, what was it, about like 2001, something like
Let's
this.
see, I started there in 90. Yeah, 2000. Well, it was before 2000 because I was there in high school. It was pre-college.
Yeah, because I was in there in high school too. Yeah.
My junior year of high school may have been 98, 99, maybe 99.
Yeah, because you were a couple years ahead of me.
Right. I graduated in 2000, and
I graduated in 02.
Right.
Even though I was supposed to graduate in 03, but yeah, it's another story because I had to be an overachiever and graduate early.
Right. I think I started there in 99, and I was there all the way through college.
And they didn't have a lot. And I remember, what were we given, a budget of like $1,000?
If that. And I think they gave us less than that, and some people donated some money to cover the rest of it. It was
when we were talking about doing this podcast last night, I was looking over my server, and just to kind of go into my background a little bit, I'm a historian, but I'm also an attorney. Been a lifelong musician, and this is what I do for fun, because being a lawyer is not fun. This is fun. I enjoy this.
Right.
But yeah. I literally found the spec sheet we drew up on Microsoft Word in 2000.
Oh, wow.
For this thing.
Yeah, that would have been about the time we bought the thing. It was in 2000.
It was. Yeah. And what we did, because back then, people take things like powered speakers for granted now.
Yep.
That was not a thing back then.
Right.
Or if it was, they were extremely expensive.
That's true. We had the big amps back in the back room, and those QSC amps. The Crown amps, I think, one of the two. But,
we had two. There was an existing QSC. It was a 250 watt amp in there, and then we bought a Crown, a 500 watt. That was what we managed to piecemeal together out of that, was a 500 watt Crown that we bought used.
Yes, and then we had to run that snake up through the wall and the ceiling and to the back. It was something else.
Fortunately, the power amps weren't too far away from the stage.
Yeah, that would have been right through the wall. Yeah,
that would have been double as difficult if we had to run that snake overhead back to where we had that mixing board, and have to run power over that too.
Yeah.
I always idly worried that, with the power cable for that stuff, something would have caught on fire because of just how piecemeal we put that together. We were not in a situation to actually do that and competently do that at the time, but we did, and it worked for a long time.
Well, they have since upgraded a couple of times since then. I think they're using a digital board now, maybe a Behringer, and some more modern stuff.
I would hope so by now.
I think we have an old Mackie board or something, or was it a Yamaha? I can't remember.
It was a Mackie board. It was
Mackie. Yeah, it was a little
Mackie
Mackie.
board, and I tried to look up the model number. I can't even find anything on it anymore.
It's been discontinued a long
It's so
time
old,
ago.
but I do have this listed on this spec sheet. It was a 16 channel board.
16 I remember that. Yeah.
It was a 16 channel board, and we went with crate 1x12s. If you
Yeah.
remember the crate passive speakers, we went with
Hmm.
1x12s on
Yeah.
that.
Mounted them on the wall on the sides.
Yep, we did all that, and well, we didn't mount them on the wall initially. We had
Oh, we had
stands
them on stands. We had them on stands.
because
That's right. Then we added the wall
because
mounts.
we
That's right.
we bought these speakers. I have a note on this. This tells you how much of a digital pack rat I am. I have
Yeah.
a note saying that they gave us the speaker stands for free when we bought those speakers.
Wow, I didn't remember that at all.
They felt so bad for us. They
Yeah,
gave us the
that's
speaker
funny.
stands for free. But we used just the snake on this, from what I recall. It was just a very, very common 16 channel breakout box snake.
Yeah, it was like an on stage or some brand.
It
I
was
can't remember
on stage.
exactly.
Who knows what it was back then?
Yeah,
But
16 channel, but we had to cut a hole through the wall and had the stage box right next to that wall, and then through the wall into the other room and up through the ceiling to the back.
and here goes tip number one: when you're trying to do this and you know nothing about carpentry, find somebody in the church who does.
Yeah, exactly.
That was my dad at the time. My dad
Thankfully.
and there was one other guy who lived right down the street from me that
Yes.
that
Yep.
both of them, carried the load, mostly trying to do that because we had no idea what we were doing.
Well, if you remember, we did the same thing in the next church I went to.
I know.
After that church, we went down the road to another church and had to build another sound system for them and had to do the same kind of thing. So,
And the crazy thing with that one was we ran it under the stage, and I crawled under that stage with the spiders and all them.
yep, that was
That was
something else.
awful.
It was, yep.
But
So,
we ran for the longest time. We just ran dummy boards, dummy mixers, because just dummy mixers because I mean they were cost efficient.
exactly.
And I looked at it today and I was thinking about this a lot. If I was going to recommend a board today, I don't think I could, recommend a dummy mixer anymore. I couldn't. There's so many good cheap digital boards these
Yeah,
days.
that's right. And that technology wasn't there when we were doing this to begin with.
20 years ago, there was nothing like it.
Right.
I mean, you were talking large stage production stuff, $5,000 plus boards
Right.
to even get into something like that. Um, you know, I would say this: we have a love-hate relationship with Behringer.
Yes, that is true.
I think that's putting it as nicely as possible. Um, I I got onto, I guess it was around 2010. I was doing a lot of live recording during that time.
I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, when I was in law school, I was making money on the side doing a lot of live recordings, and I really got into the PreSonus boards. You remember
Hmm.
that?
I do. Yeah.
And that just got to be my go-to board. I don't know
That's
what it was. I just learned it, and it was easy to use. And what I love about those PreSonus boards, and the ones I'm talking about, if you've ever looked them up on like Sweetwater or something like that, they're the Studio Live boards.
That's exactly what we use at my church right now. It's a Studio Live 32
Oh,
channel.
and that's a fun little story to tell, how we had to do that a couple days before Christmas production because
Oh,
our old board blew up.
that is true. Yeah, I had a Christmas production. We were literally the day of dress rehearsal, and Rick had come in that afternoon to help set everything up and whatnot. So we're going through the board and changing some settings, and all of a sudden we hear this loud pop, and there's smoke literally coming out of the board. And we're like literally the night before production, and we had this big production with choir and drama and the whole bit. and we have no soundboard. And this is like mid-afternoon. Places locally are going to they're going to close, and we have no way to get a board. And we're calling people, trying to see who has something we can borrow. Finally, we found one that was a demo model of all things. This Studio Live. It was a 32 channel Studio Live, and so we literally just jumped in the car and ran, and they got it to us quickly, and we were able to get back in time for rehearsal and get it set up. But that was pretty wild.
That was a wild day because what really got me about that, because we've done these productions together for so many years now. Something always goes wrong, and
Yep.
I was just waiting because nothing was going wrong.
That's right. It was going very smooth up until that point.
Yeah, and then it turned utterly catastrophic, and it was awful.
In a
But
hurry, yes.
yeah, we had to go. What was it, like 30 miles away to get a board?
We did. We had to go. Yeah. It took us a while to get there and get back. Fortunately, we had several hours before rehearsal. This was like 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
Yeah, it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon. We got it set up. It was a rush job, but we got it set up, and that board's still going good. I love that board.
It is, yeah, great board.
And I used, there's been a couple incarnations of the Studio Live. They're like, I think, on the third generation of their boards now, and they just keep getting better. They are very good boards for the price.
They are.
I don't think I could recommend any board. I mean, if I know if you're working on a budget, the next step down, I mean, you probably agree, would probably be some of the Behringer stuff.
I do like the X32, and it's very versatile. You can, and what it all comes down to when you're deciding what you want to do is basically, what are you going to use the board for? Are you literally just running sound in the house, live sounds? Or are you also going to be recording? Are you doing live streaming in addition to that? So you got to take all those factors into account when you decide on what kind of soundboard you want to buy.
Yeah, it's extremely important, I think, especially in a post-COVID world that we're living in today, where the norm and the expectation is to be live streaming.
Exactly.
And that's a good kind of inflection point right there, that you look in a post or pre-COVID world, how many churches really live streamed?
Yeah,
Like
we
small to
didn't.
medium.
I mean, that wasn't really a thing. Big churches were doing broadcasts, but you didn't see the smaller to medium sized church really doing live stream.
No,
and on another podcast we'll talk all about live streaming. Today we're talking about live sound, but that's just one aspect of your sound system. You got to think about those things when you're building a sound system, even on a budget. I mean, you can live stream very simply with camera and a small setup. Like I said, we'll talk about that on another podcast. But
and your church has been 2 or 3 years in the process that we have been refining from a simple mere iPad.
Correct. From COVID, when we started out, it was recording with an iPad, and we built it from there. So
yeah,
what we have now,
it's a work in progress. All of this is a work in progress. But if I had to look at one piece that you can't get wrong the first time, it needs to be the board. The board, I wouldn't look at something that's just replaceable every year, because it's not.
Correct. And you can get by with some cheaper speakers and whatnot, but when it comes down to quality, you really got to start with the board.
And I think it's really important, if you're going to go with a digital board and you can come up with the money and raise the money for a digital board, make sure it's one that you can actually learn how to use. Because if you're on stage, the last thing you need to be thinking about is mixing.
That's right.
And that's a problem that we've dealt with in all the years of doing this together, is finding people that you can train to use the board. And the first step with that comes with learning the board yourself.
Exactly. That's a process.
If you don't know the board, you're not going to be able to teach somebody else to use it, and they're barely going to be able to do anything with it. Now,
and I'm still learning the board we have now. I mean, in fact, I call you quite often to say, "Hey, how do we tweak this?" And
I'm still learning things. I've been using the Studio Live boards for 10 plus years now. I'm still learning stuff about them. There's still little tips and tricks I'll learn how to use them, but they're good boards and they're fairly simple. Now, if the sky was the limit, I would go with everything Midas. Midas
Yeah,
has
oh,
the
that's a
best
great brand.
preamps,
Right.
and I've worked at some churches before that had Midas boards, and I can tell you they are worth the money for high end production. But they're not. That's not the thing you strive for if you're trying to build a solid budget system. I think if I had to revolve around two brands, it would be PreSonus and it would be Behringer.
Yeah.
Um, with one caveat on Behringer, we have had talk about the production we did this past year for Christmas with those digital mixers, the dummy stage box mixers with Wi-Fi,
Yeah. Right. Yes.
the X Airs.
Oh, it created a major issue.
That was another one where I literally had to go buy a board on a Saturday morning.
That's right. Yeah. And you bought an analog board for that. So, and it worked fine. And there's
Yeah,
nothing wrong with analog boards. They've been around forever and
yeah,
they're workhorses.
yeah, and
There's just a lot of great technology in the new digital boards that you have a lot more flexibility with.
yeah, and just to put kind of a pin in what this particular situation was, you were doing the production in the gym. We were not using the main system.
That's correct, which is what we were used to using.
Yeah, we've been accustomed to the main system for a while now, and this was a secondary system
We were
that we
piecing
built up.
together a portable system. I have two portable systems. We literally chained them together, added in the mixer and all the microphones.
Yeah, and we were using a Behringer X Air 32, I believe.
That's
But
correct. Yes.
um,
Which is just for those of y'all that don't know what that is, it's basically does not have any mixer knobs on it. It just has plugs, and you run the whole thing off of an iPad. And there's an app on the iPad, and it is a great for what it is. It is a great system. It's just it runs off of Wi-Fi, and when you're dealing with Wi-Fi and you have a lot of people in the room using Wi-Fi, it can cause problems.
yeah, there's
If you
two
have
issues.
if you have a dedicated router that's on that board, you resolve a lot of that problem.
Yeah, because the thing is, you can lock it down and password protect it.
That's
Um,
correct.
what I've kind of post mortem learned about what happened to us that day we did this, and it failed on us miserably, was two things. One, this is just something to know if you're thinking about, well, $575 is the best I can come up with, and I need to get one of those Behringer uh, X Airs. You've got to have an older iPad.
That's correct. Yeah, the newer iPads we found because you had one had a
Yeah.
problem.
Well, I had a brand new M2 12.9 inch that I brought in because that's
Yep.
what I use for
Yeah, and
work.
that's what my new iPad is that, and it won't even work with that system. So
It will not. What was your old one? Was it a fourth generation iPad?
it was it was an iPad Pro. I think it was seventh
I,
generation iPad Pro, but it had it was the old school one with the button on it, the home screen, whatnot.
oh no, that's a first generation Pro. It came
Okay,
out. The first generation Pro came out around the same time the seventh gen regular iPads did.
it was a 2018 model, and it was
Right,
the Pro um,
with a
10
button
point
with a
10.5
physical button.
inch, yeah, 10.5 inch Pro with the
Yeah,
physical home button.
and you know what saved us, even though it was terrible. A lot of things failed that night, is you didn't update iOS in it.
That yeah, that's correct. And now, mind you, this was the actual night of the performance. We had a first half and a second half. We're running the show with this thing, and all of a sudden, mics are cutting out, all kinds of stuff. We get to intermission, and we're scrounging to use another mixer. We ended up having to go back to this mixer, and we got through it. But the first night was very rough. The next night we bought another mixer, an analog mixer, and everything worked fine with that.
Yeah. Um, yeah, the first point cannot be overstated, that if you are going to buy those Behringer boards, you've got to have an older iPad.
Yeah.
Just hard stop. They have not updated the software. The app has not been updated. At the time, I was using an Android phone. Do you remember?
That's right. Yeah.
I even downloaded the Android app. It was not updated either.
Right.
It would not run. The only thing that ran was your 2018 first gen iPad Pro. So that's something to keep in mind. But here's the thing: most of the time they won't tell you this because this board is still being sold brand new.
That's correct. Yeah.
But that is like the big warning sign that I think is worth noting on that. And the second is, if you go with something like that and spend the $579 for one of those boards, you need to have. Oh, I got one right here. Let's get an old dummy router. Just get an old dummy router.
Right.
Hook up to it, because I can't stress how important it is to have a router on that. It's absolutely vital to have a router, because what I figured out what happened when it screwed up and we were using the onboard router is it was showing as a open Wi-Fi network.
Everybody's phone was connecting to it.
Now, here's the thing. Some of you might be out there asking, why didn't we figure this out the night before during dress rehearsal? It's because no one was on the Wi-Fi.
We didn't have anybody in the room besides our cast, and we weren't using our phones at the time.
And so what do most people do? This is just a big problem. I think with Wi-Fi in churches in general, what do most people do? They see a free Wi-Fi network, they get on it.
They immediately get on it.
And that's what they did.
They're scrolling Facebook and emails and everything else in between scenes or whatever.
But you just made a good point. The first scene, it worked fine. Because remember, we told them to turn off their phones.
That's correct, yeah.
And then what did they do? Lights come up. Because it was a dinner theater kind of thing.
Right.
Is what this production was. And so what happened? Lights come up. People get back on their phones. Now I can't control the router.
Right. Yeah, we had scene one, and then we took a break, and they served food. Lights came up. People kind of chatted for a little bit while they're eating, and during that time, they were scrolling on their phones and connecting to the Wi-Fi, and it just messed everything up.
And I lost control of everything.
Yep. Yeah, night one was pretty rough, but by the end, I thought it all turned out good at the end.
It did. And there's a lot of lessons to learn out of that board. There's a lot of touring bands and people like that use these boards, but you just got to understand, have an old iPad, have a router.
Exactly.
And password protect that network.
Right. Yeah, a lot of small bands will use those for like coffee shop gigs and, various little small things.
I never, I'll be real honest. I had never used one of those up until that production, because I did. I'm in the DFW area, and so a lot of coffee shop gigs, stuff like that. I play acoustic and have a female vocalist who often goes with me, and we're running 2-channel. We're not running, a lot. And so what we've used over the years is just a Studio Live.
Yeah.
And I have 2 of them. I have a 16-channel version, and I have a 32. And one's a first generation, one's a second generation.
Right.
One of them still has FireWire.
Yeah.
Which is old school.
That is very old school.
But this is something to note for anybody looking for one of those mixers. So you're interested in the Studio Live because we've been talking good about it. When you go on Craigslist and you start looking for these, the biggest way you're going to know you're dealing with a first generation versus a second and third is, does it have FireWire?
Yeah.
You are not going to do any meaningful recording today with FireWire. I used to love that standard. That used to be, I would use it over everything. But today with USB-C and USB 3.0, there is no reason to be using FireWire anymore, unless you have a computer from the, like 2009, 2010, something like that. But so that's something to look for, is make sure any digital board you find has USB on it.
Right.
The standard now, there used to be so much back and forth in the audio community, and a little of my backgrounds, I do mastering. Mastering has been sort of my niche
for
10 plus years now.
Yep.
I have tried about every interface under the sun, and we're talking hyper expensive ones all the way down to the cheap ones. I don't even think the Thunderbolt interfaces that they really market actively to Apple guys
Right.
are worth it. USB-C is such a good standard. USB
Yeah.
3 is a good standard.
Well,
I don't think there's much of a difference.
it does work good.
Now, you're probably not listening to us if you deal with 64 channels or more on a given
Correct.
Sunday.
That's right.
If you're doing that, then there are things for you, and that is Dante and moving that direction towards Ethernet based stuff.
Yes, that's
But
pretty high end
for
stuff.
yeah, for this purpose, what you're looking for is you're looking for a good digital board that has USB that you're able to record with or splice off the channels for a live stream. So you have flexibility.
Correct.
That's what you want. And I know we've sat here and harped about boards, but there's other important things too. Um, in this day and age, I think there are so many good powered speakers out there.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's what you got to think about. If you're going to go speakers and amps, if you don't have a powered speaker, you have to buy an amp or multiple amps to power them. However, but like you said, there's some really good powered speakers out there that does not require the amps, and you may be able to save a little bit of money by just buying the powered speakers.
That's right. I have a set of L1s. So if I ever go play anywhere in the DFW area, I'm using L1s. I have a sub. Now, is it the best sub in the world? No, it's not. It's called a sub one. Bose makes the L1 system, and they have two different subs. They have a real big one, and then they have just the standard sub. We've gotten by with using the smaller ones, the smaller sub ones.
Right.
Now, there are some people out there who can absolutely get by with one L1 stick and one subwoofer.
Right.
And this goes to a big issue that I don't think is discussed a lot. And I know we discussed this at length at your current church when the people installed the sound system that you guys currently have. I don't think people are really taking acoustics into mind the way they need to when they start structuring these things.
That's true. Yeah.
And I'm not saying that everybody needs to go in and have a full testing done, a frequency range testing done. It's not that. You've really got to know the size of what you're dealing with. Now, I thought about this. That first church we were at was really small.
Yeah.
I honestly think today, if I had to put a speaker in that room today, I could get away with one L1.
That would fill the whole room.
I think it would. And all I do is I would run a line in or my left and right out of my mixer straight into the input one and input two on the L1.
Yeah, that's a very simple setup and would be great in small church.
Yeah, I think so. And the thing about L1s is, you look on Sweetwater, they're about $1,900 for an L1 setup. If you look on Facebook Marketplace and you look on Craigslist, and I steer away from Craigslist. That used to be my go-to for buying cheap stuff was Craigslist. But I see a lot of good L1 systems that haven't been abused too much and beat up on Facebook Marketplace. Local guys selling them because they're upgrading, little local bands doing stuff like that. And you can get a good set, I think, for around $1,000.
Right.
And if you have to go lower than that, passive speakers are still a thing. They still make them. But you just got to understand, you've got to be able to buy the amp with it. And you have to look at the cost associated with it. Power amps are not cheap. Good power amps are not cheap.
Yes.
We found this out the hard way This is one of those weird things I had a note on from all these years ago. Is the initial QSC amps we were using were overheating.
Right.
If you remember where they were placed it right in a little side room where you
That's
had
right.
to walk behind for the baptistry
Hmm.
and everything like that. Right there, there was no air conditioning there,
No, it's up on a shelf in the side room up against a wall. No airflow or anything going through
no
there.
airflow, and it overheated and it shut down.
Right.
That is one thing to consider about regular power amps, especially if you had to start stacking, because we had two. We had one for the monitor system and we had one for the mains.
Right. Yeah,
Something to
that's
think
another
about
thing
too.
to think about is if you're going to use monitors, you're going to use either in-ear monitors or you're going to use floor wedges. And if you use floor wedges, if you don't go with powered, you got to have another amp to power those as well.
Yeah.
And so
I've looked at the cost spread on all this, and I just think for small to medium sized churches, powered is the way to go now.
no, I agree.
But because one thing I think of more than anything is there's going to be a lot of people out there who are just like us that can't afford to hire a company to come in and do it for
That's true. Yeah,
them. And we're going to have to do it ourselves. We're our own tech support.
for sure.
I mean, really, that's it. We're our own tech support when
Yeah,
things
no,
go
there was no
wrong.
way we could afford to hire somebody to come in and do it.
That first church, no way.
No, we bought all the pieces, had them shipped in, or we went and picked them up at the local music store, and then we did
Yeah.
everything ourselves
Yep.
through trial and error, for
Yeah.
sure.
And here's the reality of it. Just because you set it up doesn't mean it's not going to have problems.
That's right.
I mean, you look at your $10,000 plus setup you've got at your church right now, you've got a whole amp bank that doesn't work.
That's correct. Yeah, we have amp bank that doesn't work. The choir monitors that we spent good money on don't work because the amp's not working. It's a mess, and so we're
Yeah.
still dealing with some of those issues. And we'll
I
see
think
how
I
that.
think in a nutshell, you have to be your own tech support.
Correct.
And to me, if I had to take a church like the first church you were in the second church you were in, I would go all powered with a good digital mixer, very high quality cables. Do not skimp on cables. I
No,
cannot
that's
stress that one
very
enough.
important. That's correct.
Yeah, over the years, I've been kind of a journeyman in building cables. I have dissected a lot of quote unquote expensive cables that you could buy, and they're not made well.
Right.
I've very, very much thought about the quality of cables because it matters, especially if you're moving power over it.
Hmm.
That's a big one. And this goes to say one important point about powered speakers. Whatever power plug they give you with that thing, you better use it
Right. Yeah.
because a
Don't
lot
use
of them
third
are
party
like
power
the
plug or
a lot of them are those little 3 pins like you see on the back of a computer.
right.
Those are not all made equal
That's correct.
because of how much wattage they're pulling. Because think of it this way: there's a mini amplifier inside those power speakers,
That's correct.
and if it's pulling a lot of wattage, what's going to happen is that cable is going to get hot if you're not using the right cable for it.
Yeah.
The last thing you want is a fire hazard or something like that. So cable quality matters, especially on power cables. But
Let's
you know,
go ahead.
yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, well, let's talk briefly about microphones. Next week, we're going to spend the whole podcast talking about all things microphones.
Yes,
But microphones are very important. You don't want to buy the cheap Radio Shack microphones, but you don't necessarily have to have the high-end Shure or Sennheiser microphones as well. So there's a happy medium, especially if you're on a budget.
and you're dating us right now talking about Radio Shack.
I mean, you can't go wrong with the old standard Shure SM58 microphone. It's a workhorse.
They've been
Great sound.
$100 for who knows how many years now.
Exactly.
And they just work.
If you're not going wireless, I mean, they make wireless versions of that as well. But if you're not going wireless, I mean, you can't go wrong with the Shure SM58. Like I said, next week on our podcast, we're going to talk all things microphones. We'll spend the whole time talking about different types of microphones
Yep.
and what their uses are. dynamic microphones, condenser microphones. We'll spend the entire time next week. We're about out of time right now. I will say that this podcast is produced by Paradigm Media Productions. If you would like to get in touch with us, if you have a question or a topic you'd like for us to discuss, churchtechprobs@gmail.com. You can reach us there, and we'll be happy to respond to you. We'll field those questions, and we look forward to talking to you again next week.
Yep.
Y'all have a great week.